too, that way so like it will look like there's people over here. Yay! So ladies and gentlemen, yesterday I was going to give a talk about the space industry of Kent, so like very few people know about. And as you know, I left my notes at home, so I couldn't give that talk. So today, what I did was, I left my notes at home, but I memorised them, so I will still do the talk. So, for anybody that doesn't know me, so like, I am Kit Cox, and I am an author, and the first book I wrote was this wonderful tome called How to Bag a Jabberwock, which is actually a guide, a practical guide to monster hunting. Now, what I didn't realise that when I wrote this book, because it is about monsters, was it meant that I would suddenly be brought into this amazing pantheon of science called cryptozoology. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what cryptozoology means, crypto means something undiscovered, and zoology is obviously the discovery of animals, or the study of animals. So cryptozoology is the study of undiscovered animals, such as the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, and things like that. Now, there is no actual proper science behind cryptozoology. You can be a zoologist, you can be an anthropologist. What I didn't realise that if you write a book about monsters, though, you will become a professional cryptozoologist. And I have even been on the news talking about monsters on the news, not on April the 1st as well. So for anyone that doesn't know, so like, there is a Yeti, a red-haired Yeti, that haunts Tunbridge Wells just after the pubs kick out, ironically. And so I was on the news talking about that, and the fact that Yeti has been up there since World War II. But because of that, I thought, so that's brilliant. So I am now a professional cryptozoologist, and if I say it to certain people, they truly believe that I've had some kind of education, which I never got. And I thought, if you can just put crypto in front of anything and become an academic, then surely I can become a crypto historian and make up history, very much like the Daily Mail makes up the news. So what I decided to do was, I thought, there is a few things that I've always known to be a fact about science fiction that was written in the Victorian era. And for anyone that doesn't know, so like, all science fiction, pretty much written in England, was written by authors that lived in the southeast of England. And because they tended to write about where they knew, the places that sort of like appear in these books are all around Kent. So all of science fiction from the era of sort of like the golden age of literature came from Kent. So as a good example, the War of the Worlds is a war that is fought between the world of Mars and the world of Surrey and London. So it's a very small war of the world. And obviously it's been extended by other people, but it literally is just that thing. And then you take the first men in the moon. So H.G. Wells wrote a book, and in his book about the first men in the moon, the Cavorite sphere leaves Romney Marsh, goes to the moon, has a whole adventure on the moon for all the orbit that the moon was making around the Earth, and then manages to return from the moon back to Romney Marsh. NASA can't even land in the same place they launched from, but apparently we can. So like, because of that, I thought there must be a way that we can look at literature and find if there is a history for this country. About a space program based on Cavorite. And when I started looking into it, looking into the books, I realised that there really was. And you will have seen people wandering around wearing these cake badges. So there's, in the audience, hello. So anybody wearing a cake badge. Now cake, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the Cavorite affiliation of Kentish explorers, or the Kentish space program. And it lasted from 1847 to 1947, and I can tell you the whole history of it. So, in 1847, there was these two gentlemen, a man called Mr. Cavor and a man called Mr. Bedford. Mr. Bedford was a businessman that funded lots of things, and Cavor was a scientist who created a A solution, when painted on the surface of anything, would allow that surface to repel gravity. He then built a sphere, he painted it with Cavorite, and they went to the moon. They then came back from the moon and they landed back at Romney Marsh, but they didn't both come back from the moon. What actually happened was only Bedford came back from the moon and Professor Cavor stayed there. Now, when Bedford got out of the sphere, a young boy called Tommy got into the sphere, closed the door, and the sphere shot off, and Tommy was never to be seen again. If you are a gentleman that disappears for a few days and then walks back into any place in Romney and says, there was a little boy that's gone missing and a prominent professor has gone missing and I'm the only person involved, then the police will also get involved. So the people of Romney said sort of like, well, what's happened? And he had to explain that sort of like, well, I built this sphere with this man, we went to the moon, and this Tommy guy's gone missing. Now because of that, the police said, well, we're going to have to arrest you. But the people of Romney were more advanced than that, and they turned around and they said, how about we go looking for Tommy? If you build a few more of these spheres, you must have the stuff to do it. So they built a few more of the spheres and they went off into space looking for Tommy, a guy unfortunately they never found. But what that did do was that did launch the Cavorite affiliation of Kentish Explorers, where Bedford invested in the people of Romney Marsh travelling around the universe and exploring it. And their adventures are actually locked into several books of the era. Now you can go through the entire universe, our planets, and from each of the planets you can find books which give you the life sources which are on those planets, and I shall tell you about them. So we'll start with Mercury. So if you go to Mercury, there is a book called About the Light Country, all about Mercury, and it says that so like Mercury doesn't spin. So Mercury is a very hot planet, and so you can't live on one side of it because it is far too hot, and you can't live on the other side of it because it's far too cold. But in the middle, so like there is just the right temperate amount of like place you can live, and men live there very happily, and women, they have wings. So if you've seen all these lovely girls walking around with their fairy wings, they could be people from Mercury, so like, or a representation of people from Mercury. And they will fly around as single women, just catching the air currents and having a lovely life. And every now and again, a man will look up and so like, he will see these beautiful women with their gossamer wings and he'll think, oh, I would like to make that lady my wife. And as the book so rightly states, he catches that woman and removes her wings so that she could never fly again. That's Victorian literature for you, ladies and gentlemen. So he cuts the wings off, and so if you are married, you are wingless and will never fly again and will always stay at home by the sink, cooking food and washing up after your gentleman, who is also wingless and will never go anywhere with his life. So that's Mercury for you. So, and then we move out a little bit further, and we're going to, where should we go next? Should we go Venus, Jupiter? Where would we like to go? Venus? Should we go to Venus? We do it in order, yeah? Yeah. So like you get to Venus and you find that so like on Venus, the creatures of Venus are very, very heavy. And if anyone has ever taken any liquor like sand or granules and poured it down, you will see that so like that the smaller grains stay at the top and it will come down until you make a cone. That's why we build pyramids and things like that. But on Venus, so like the creatures are almost squid-like in their appearance and the fact that they are conical. Now they didn't write any books at this time, but in the 1950s they made a film about one of these creatures from Venus, and it was called It Came from Outer Space. It's of this wonderful conical creature, looks a little bit like a squid, travelled here so like by closing its legs together and flying through the air like a bullet to land here. Now unlike Mercury, so like you find out that so like this large conical beast is actually the female of the species, the most important of their species, and the men are just tiny little bat-like things that just like hang on to the back of them, so like not actually having any proper worth. So like being up in the north of England. And so like they travel around, and so it's a very female-orientated species, so like on Venus. Then we get to Earth. Now when I go to talk about Earth, you think, what could possibly have happened on Earth? So like you've got cake with a Cavorite affiliation. And when they were on Earth, you'll find that there were other things that Cake did while they were here. There was obviously, they examined it through the temporal sort of like regions of time to do a bit of time travel. And there's a lot of literature that backs us up on that. And that gives us a temporal exploration agency, or T. So you have Cake and T, which go very, very nicely together. And of course, in 1860, the year after Isambard Kingdom Brunel died, he put a massive fund up for people to build innovations, craft that so like could do more. Now obviously Cake had already had their Cavorite sphere, so what could they do? They decided that they wanted to build craft that would go under the surface of the sea, which is what they did. And they got this funding from the Brunel Institute, but they found that some of the early designs of craft they did could also go underneath the land. So like, there are books to back us up on that: 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, the Earth's Core. There's lots of things that back us up. So like, and that part of Cake became the Brunel Institute Submersible Craft Unit, including terrain, or Biscuit. So we now have Cake, Tea and Biscuit. And obviously the people that are on Earth, if they're on the land, they looked into giant flora and fauna. So you had the Giant Investigation Network, or GIN. And at sea, so like you have the reports of undersea monsters, or RUM. So obviously we get GIN on the land and RUM, so like if we go in a naval tradition. So we're going to leave Earth now until like the adventures they do there, and I can do other talks on those. And then we're going to go out to the moon. Now when we get to the moon, we'll find that so like you get the Selenites. And the Selenites are very much mentioned in the first Men in the Moon. Creatures that live inside the moon's core, very insect-like, hive mind, and nothing that was ripped up by H.R. Geiger and taken full responsibility as being his idea, written by H.G. Wells many, many years before. So like clearly it was a new idea. So we then go further out, and after the moon we're going to go to Mars. Now when we think of Mars, instantly we think of the Martian invaders. But I can tell you straight away that the War of the Worlds, that tiny war between one place, the Martians from that did not come from Mars. Read the book carefully and you will find straight away that those Martians were actually parasites that had already landed on Mars and destroyed Mars and moved on. In fact, it says in one scene that they had the indigenous creatures of Mars are kept in cages as a food source for this invading people. So the Martians in War of the Worlds do not come from Mars. So we can't use those as the indigenous species. It says that greys come from Mars, as small, little tiny men, sort of like with big grey heads, sort of like large eyes. So they are the actual Martians. And there are many books that back that up from sort of like literature of the Victorian era. Once you find this out, so like it opens up a whole world, so like, and you think, who first went to Mars? What are these literature books? And there's a lovely French book about a man who gets a small box that he goes in and he wants to travel through time, but in the story, he only actually goes to Mars, where he meets several people on Mars, but he goes to a different part of Mars's timeline. And he's an old man, so like he likes to have companions around him, and he travels in a box. And apparently, so like that idea hasn't been used since the Victorian era. No one's ripped that off. So like, it's weird because it feels like something you could keep running, I don't know, as a TV series or something for 50 years plus. Yeah, that idea apparently just stayed in the Victorian era as this madman travelling in a box through time and space and relative dimensions of it. So we go out further now and we go to Jupiter. Now when we start going out to Jupiter, so like we find that the animals, that the creatures are on these planets start to become a little bit different. And on Jupiter, we actually lose some of the people being on the planet themselves, and we go out to the moons of Jupiter. And you find that the creatures, there's one creature which is called a loony, which is a very large-bodied creature with an incredibly long neck and a head that looks like a balloon. So that's the loony. The lady nodding her head there as if, oh yes, I've seen one of those. Yeah, wandering around the streets of Medway towns. Many loonies in Medway towns. So, and And then you get these rat-like creatures. So like, again, the ladies got in, like, yeah, also Medway Town, so like, and so like, they run alongside the lilies and they steal a lot of stuff and things like that. Ironically, in the book, they were originally called, and I do apologise about this is just the era, they were originally called gypsies. Spelled slightly differently, but then they were then called scrivers later on, so like in a re-edit of the book, when someone said, we'll probably get done for that. So we then move out from those planets. But there is a planet in Ganymede. You find that the people of Ganymede that look like ostriches, they are taught about Christmas by the Earthmen that have landed there. And because of that, the ostriches have always done all the work for the Earthmen when they land on Ganymede. Suddenly decide Christmas they want the day off, and they just stop doing anything. And they won't go back to work until Father Christmas has been. So the spacemen from Earth have to concoct a whole sort of like Father Christmas thing to visit the Aussies, as they're called, and to like give them sort of like Christmas presents and spread joy. And they do that by strapping some giant flying oxen to a sled, and then giving presents, and then all the Aussies go back to work for them. We go out further, and the moment you start going out further with Neptune and Pluto, you start to realise that the only person who was prepared to write about planets further out was H.P. Lovecraft. Now, we've got an H.P. Lovecraft tent, and you can see how wonderful and weird H.P. Lovecraft's creatures are. And so, just to give a brief summary of them, one of them is made of fungoid material. One of them is cuboid in shape, with more legs than can be counted, and the last one is a gas, which I can only assume that H.P. Lovecraft was sitting around going, I can't be bothered to describe this one, it was a gas. So when you go through space, sort of like in literature, you start to find that sort of like there is a very rich seam of people that have visited. And if you use crypto historians, you can find out that sort of like there is this wonderful history of space travel, all leaving from Kent. And you can even tie in with the War of the Worlds to this actual dockyard itself, because the Prometheus, which is the ship, the Thunderchild, which is the ship that takes down the first Martian vehicle in War of the Worlds, was actually based on the Prometheus, which was built in this very dockyard. So the Thunderchild was built here, just to tie in even closer to where we are at this precise moment in time. Now you have to ask, if this is a history, how come we don't know about this? How come there aren't still things going on? And obviously when you're exploring out in the stars, you're away from the planet, so no one would see you. And no one came back until it was the First World War. So when the First World War started, you'll see that all these Cavorite spheres came back, and they wanted to help the war effort, but they didn't want to be military. And when they didn't want to be military, what they did was they covered themselves in canvas and launched themselves up and spied on what the enemy were doing at the time, and reported that back as a way of helping the war effort. And if you look at any old photographs of the trenches, you'll see these massive things that look like big canvas balloons, but they're just Cavorite spheres with tarpaulin over the top. So there is actual photographic evidence of the Cavorite spheres being used. Now obviously by the time it got to the Second World War, which was quite close, following quite close on the back of that, the government suddenly realised that if these people don't want to get involved military, then we're going to take over cake. So the government had the cake and ate it for themselves, and they ran with that. And they used the Cavorite spheres to fight the Nazi UFO menace. And I'm sure if you go on the internet, you'll be able to find lots of pictures of Nazi UFOs, which will really back that up as well. And it wasn't until 1947, when you think that well, cake should with now government back and be this amazing thing. But it was when a cake craft was flying across America, it accidentally clipped another craft which was coming from Venus, flying across America, and the two of them crashed in the desert. The cake craft was taken away, but I think there's a few bits and pieces on the internet about a crash in 1947. Yeah, but because it took down an American weather satellite as well during that, everyone went very quiet because they know how gun-happy nasty the Americans can sometimes be if you start knocking their stuff out of the sky. And so Cake was unfortunately disbanded in 1947. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is a slice of Cake's history. And a wonderful trip into cryptozoology. And if you look around, you can see some of the Cake Futurenauts walking amongst you. So like this man is, and he knows. So he's fully briefed on sort of like the space travel of this fair industry. And I think that's it. So it's been lovely being up here for you. It's been lovely explaining to you so like there is a history. And I think there are now some very dapper chaps about to hit each other with sticks for your amusement. So I shall leave you in there and the lovely Mandy. I don't know why my voice does it, and the lovely Mandy. On the phone for.
Another big round of applause for Kit Cox, everyone, please. Oh, he's always a delight. He's always a treat, isn't he? He's lovely. I've learned. I feel very educated now. I've learned all about cake. I'm a little bit hungry now, but yeah, I've learned about cake. So now, yes, Kit is right. You are now about to see some very dapper people hit each other with sticks, but there's a lot more to it. So do take a seat. We're just going to be cornering off the main stage area because